before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
You can't get answers in a tweet on Face the Nation. We try to separate the noise from the news. You need to be able to have an actual conversation.
What they want here, sure more than anything else, is for Washington to get things done again. We can't elect a speaker. We can't pass a budget.
It is literally an hour-by-hour effort here at the White House and at the State Department to find out where these folks are and to try to make the effort to get them out.
Do you stand by your past comment that you will support Donald Trump if he's the party nominee?
Look, it's too early to be talking about. I can't recall ever not supporting the Republican nominee.
Hello, I'm Ed O'Keefe in your nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Welcome to America Decides. And then there were 9. House Republicans are gathering Monday evening to once again consider who should be the Speaker of the House. The House of Representatives have sat in suspense for now 20 days with no end in sight. Late last week, Republicans ousted Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, you see there, as their preferred choice with a secret ballot behind closed doors. They'll try again this week. Now, 9 Republicans vying for the job: Jack Bergman of Michigan, Byron Donalds of Florida, Tom Emmer of Minnesota, Kevin Hern of Oklahoma, Mike Johnson of Louisiana, Dan Muser of Pennsylvania, Gary Palmer of Alabama, Austin Scott of Georgia, and Pete Sessions of Texas. We should point out ultimately 10 men are running for Speaker, as House Democrats have nominated their leader, Hakeem Jeffries of New York. But it's the Republicans holding up things. And we turn to CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian, who's been on Speaker Watch since the dawn of time, it seems. Nicole, happy Monday, another week, and still no resolution to this. Walk us through what we should expect and how it's different from what we've seen previously as they try to sort out who will lead them.
Well, Ed, I don't know that it will be much different than what we have seen, other than it's a much wider field. I almost feel like it's the Republican presidential primary, the way this speaker's race is now shaping up. I mean, obviously, we started the beginning of the year with Kevin McCarthy. McCarthy was ousted about 3 weeks ago. Then it was Majority Leader Steve Scalise who was in the running. He withdrew. Then you had Jim Jordan, who then ran. He couldn't succeed after 3 ballots. He was voted out on a secret ballot Friday, and that brings us to this point here today, where we have 9 candidates that pretty much have to go through the same gauntlet. They're going to need 217 votes ultimately on the House floor, but before we get to that point, they are going to have to make their case to Republicans. That is what's happening tonight. There will be a candidate forum where they are making their arguments to rank and file members. Many of them have been making calls over the weekend. Some of them have already spoken with former President Trump. And then on Tuesday, then we will see a secret ballot where basically the highest vote getter will likely emerge as that candidate who ultimately will go to the floor.
Now, Nicole, nothing personal to them, but not many of these men are well known outside the Republican ranks. Who sort of stands out to you as someone who may have a shot at this?
Well, right now, Republican Whip Tom Emmer appears to have that front-runner status in the sense that he is number 3 in leadership. He has the backing of former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. He really is the guy who has been at the center of a lot of these contentious negotiations, whether it was over the debt limit, over temporarily funding the government this fall. He's the one that has brought all different factions of the Republican conference into his office to hammer things out, whether it's those contentious pieces of legislation, rules, and otherwise. So that's why, for now, he appears to be that front runner. But look, any one of these candidates could be a potential dark horse. And you have some kind of taking to some interesting strategies to try to woo their fellow members, including Oklahoma Congressman Kevin Hern, who used to own about 24 McDonald's franchises. He has been sending cheeseburgers to members along with a letter about why he thinks he's the best candidate in this race.
Cheeseburgers. I don't know. I'm a quarter pounder with sometimes with, sometimes without. What about you? What do you?
Well, I mean, I clarified. I was like, no, just to be clear, no Big Macs, right? Because that seems to be the signature hamburger from McDonald's. But, you know, cheeseburgers, you can't go wrong, right? Everybody loves them.
Well, I guess. Or you better hope so. At least 217 of them do. You spoke late Friday with Jim Jordan, who is now the former Speaker designate. What went wrong with his Speaker bid, and has he indicated who he might support?
Yeah, well, you know, I asked him about that not long after he was defeated on Friday. And in simple terms, he simply told me he didn't have the votes. And, you know, ultimately, this is a game of math, as we discussed, for any of these candidates. You know, Jordan was one of those who had made clear he was going to try to ride this out as long as he could. But he did acknowledge that he was the one that called for that secret ballot that ultimately led to his own ouster. Take a listen to what he told us Friday.
Got the results, and I thanked every one of our colleagues and said I will work as hard as I can to help all of you, help our team, help us get a new speaker, and go do the work that the American people want us to do. And that's what I'm going to do.
So he is pledging to be a team player. He would not say who he would support in this new race, but as you heard there, he said he would back whoever emerges as the next speaker designee. So stay tuned, but obviously Jim Jordan now out of the running, so we will see who emerges next, Ed.
We will. Nicole, it's going to be another late Monday night. We'll have the assignment to send you some chicken nuggets.
We'll order some, right, or some cheeseburgers.
Whatever it takes.
I personally like the apple pies, but.
All right. Is somebody taking notes? Let's hope so. All right, Nicole, thank you.
Let's hope so.
We'll talk to you over the course of the week. In other news, sources tell CBS News Hamas has released 2 more hostages. The Red Cross says it helped transport them out of the Middle East. Their release comes after 2 American hostages were released by Hamas last week. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cortez joins us now from the North Lawn. Nancy, the release of 2 more hostages has to be considered encouraging by the Biden administration tonight, no?
Sure, because there are still about 10 Americans who are unaccounted for after a couple of American hostages were freed at the end of last week. But the question is this the start of something more? Is Hamas planning to release more hostages? We know that there are still dozens in captivity. The president, it was interesting, was asked today at an unrelated event about Bidenomics. As he was leaving, he was asked whether he thinks that there should be some kind of ceasefire for hostages deal. This is something that has been floated, that perhaps Hamas would give back the hostages in exchange for a ceasefire by the Israelis. And what the president said was that that Hamas ought to give back those hostages first, and then they can talk.
In fact, I think we have that sound. We might as well hear the president himself explain this if we can.
Is the U.S. supporting the hostages for a ceasefire deal?
Why did you? We should have a ceasefire. It's not a ceasefire. We should have those hostages released, and then we can talk.
Nancy, the other issue that has been the subject of, or the focus really of those of us tracking this here in Washington, is how the Biden administration, in essence, is trying to slow the inevitable Israeli ground offensive. There was clarification sought today by reporters. What exactly is the White House saying about that?
Well, this is a very delicate diplomatic dance right now, Ed. Publicly, what they are saying is that they're not going to dictate to the Israeli Defense Forces any kind of a timeline, that's up to the Israelis. But privately, we know, and you have reported, that the U.S. is very much urging Israeli officials to take it slow here for a number of reasons. First of all, out of concern for those hostages who are still being held in Gaza. Second, to give the Egyptians more time to bring humanitarian aid into Gaza. They worry that if the Israelis were to go in with ground forces, that the Egyptians would say, hey, we're not going to, under these conditions, try to bring water and food and medicine that's so badly needed by Palestinian civilians. And then beyond that, there are some concerns that the Israelis need to think this through a little more carefully. In fact, in the White House briefing, the U.S. National Security spokesman, John Kirby, sort of hinted at that, saying, we're asking the Israelis, what is the plan? What is your plan for the aftermath? Do you know what you would do afterwards? Essentially suggesting that the Israelis need to get a better handle on exactly how they think all of this will play out before they go in with ground forces, especially because just in the past few days, Ed, we have seen U.S. troops in the region come under attack. And this is something that the Pentagon is so concerned about that they've actually sent a few top military officials to Israel to begin advising them on ground invasion plans.
That's right. A few senior Marine generals, among others, a sign of just how directly involved the U.S. is, at least in helping them think through all this. Nancy Cortez at the White House, we thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan sat down with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. You'll see some of that conversation that you didn't see on Sunday next. Stay with us. You're streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened.
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response? You want me to just
What's
keep
wrong
going?
with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
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 It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me, and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Why did you miss the moment?
I'm not sure why they missed the moment.
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
Welcome back to America Decides. You may have seen that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell sat for an interview with Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan over the weekend. Most of that conversation aired on Sunday, and a few times since here on the streaming network. But we have never before seen portions, including this exchange.
Do you stand by your past comment that you will support Donald Trump if he's the party nominee?
Look, it's too early to be talking about, I can't recall ever not supporting the Republican nominee, but I don't know who that's going to be yet. In the meantime, let me say one more time, we have a job to do. The election is next year, and the threats to the United States and to our allies are enormous.
Mm-hmm. So just to button up, are you confident we can avoid a shutdown and that this national security package can be delivered on by Congress?
Well, we're going to take a good hard look at it and probably make some suggestions and be particularly interested in the border part of it. We think that's a disaster and needs to be addressed.
And that'll help you bring along the rest.
It certainly would help.
Will we avoid a shutdown?
A government shutdown? No, I don't think that'll happen.
We'll see. Joining me now, Daniela Diaz and Andrew Desiderio. Daniela, a congressional reporter for Politico and co-author of Huddle, a must-read recap of all things Congress. And Andrew is a senior congressional reporter for Punchbowl News, which is also a must-read newsletter and texting service on all things Congress. So who better to bring in at the start of what could be another busy week on Capitol Hill? I also give you both an excuse to get off the Hill for at least a few hours, as it's clearly been a tricky place to be the last few weeks. Daniela, he doesn't think there's going to be a shutdown. Until we have a speaker, we have no way of knowing. We have these 9 running. Is there someone in that collection who could conceivably lead the House Republican caucus to avoiding a shutdown if they're chosen quickly?
You know, I've been covering this for the last, I'm losing track now, 20 days,
20 days
since they
20
booted
days.
McCarthy as speaker. And I've lost faith personally as a reporter. Most of the press corps has. Most of the members have lost faith that they could possibly, anyone could get 217, which is that magic number that's needed to become speaker on the House floor. What we're going to see in the next 24 hours is 9 members try to get 217. There's going to be a long ballot process tomorrow morning, possibly 8 secret ballots. It could take hours for one person to emerge from that. Of course, the leading candidate being Tom Emmer, who's currently the majority whip. But it's unclear whether even he can get 217 votes on the House floor. So it's all up in the air. And also want to note that only 5 of the members that are running for speaker have actually voted to keep the government open the last time it happened. And that CR is the reason why McCarthy was booted in the first place. And members are already talking about, Republican members specifically, that they're going to have to do another CR to keep the government open. And that's going to be another challenge in itself, considering that's what led to McCarthy being booted in the first place. So a lot of things in flux, and it's unclear how this is going to end. Ed.
And if you look at the House calendar, there are only 8 legislative days left, which means the House is supposed to be in session doing work between now and November 17th when this thing ends. So conceivably, you know, they're going to bump up right against that or blow through it, and somehow they're going to have to pass another continuing resolution. You sit over the upper chamber most of the time. How frustrating is this for them?
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating. I mean, you talk to Republican senators, and the first thing they say, even McConnell has said it actually, is we got to get rid of the motion to vacate. It's a ridiculous sort of thing hanging over any Republican speaker.
This is the vote that triggered everything.
Right. That's what allowed McCarthy to be booted from the speakership in the first place, with just a small minority of Republicans in support of that. But, you know, there is going to have to be a continuing resolution to fund the government past November 17th. There's no way all 12 appropriations bills are going to be passed and that they're all going to be conferenced in the next few weeks, especially since we don't have a speaker right now still, and we don't know when that might happen. So what McConnell's referring to is, well, he's not inspiring a lot of confidence in the idea of avoiding a government shutdown, number one. And number two, this is just an acknowledgement that the CR is going to have to be necessary. And a lot of these conservatives who voted to boot McCarthy in the first place were upset that they had to resort to a CR in the first place. And that is the result of this now 3-week-long saga where we don't have a speaker, which is they can't consider anything on the floor, much less appropriations.
And if I could just add, it's McConnell being entirely optimistic about the House. He has always been kind of a more measured voice. but House Republicans don't listen to him.
Right.
So it's going to be really interesting. He's saying there's not going to be a shutdown, but really he has no say, and it could be really chaotic.
Sometimes they use him as a foil, not listen to what he says, literally do the opposite of what he does.
Right.
Yeah.
He had some other things to say regarding what Congress is up to in the conversation with Margaret. Let's take a listen to what else he had to say.
To stand up, though, the United States military would like some of its military commanders to get the promotions that they have been appointed for. Senator Tuberville has a hold on at least 300 military nominations.
Yeah.
Why haven't you been able to get him to back off?
Well, I disagree with that decision. These people that are being held are not policymakers. They're in the military.
Commander of the Navy's Fifth Fleet, Deputy Commander of CENTCOM.
Yeah.
Pretty important jobs for a crisis in the Middle East.
I agree with you totally, and I've told Senator Tuberville, and I've said publicly that I don't think this is the way to go, and it's very, very concerning.
Why isn't he backing down?
You'd have to ask him.
But he's not listening to you.
Well, look, this is not a dictatorship. I can't order people to do things. I've said publicly I thought it was a mistake, and I'm telling you again publicly I think it's a mistake.
So bad to do, but I can't do anything to stop him. Andrew, it is significant that these hundreds of military nominations still being held up, even how many, 2 weeks into this conflict in the Middle East?
Right, exactly. So in mid-July, I was in Lithuania for the NATO summit with a coteau of senators who had traveled there. They went to a military base near the border with Belarus, where we heard actually explosions in the distance where they're trying to sort of intimidate the American troops that are nearby and also training the Ukrainians on our equipment. And, you know, one of the messages that those commanders at that military base were giving to the senators on that day in July was, hey, you guys got to impress on Senator Tuberville to lift his holds. And what all the senators said in response was that they think it's going to end soon. They think that, you know, it's going to get, you know, the number of stalled promotions is just going to snowball eventually, that, you know, it's not sustainable to keep doing this. We're 3 months later now, and Senator Tuberville has the same position. And frankly, he's benefiting politically from it because in his state it's very popular, and he's raising a ton of money off of it. So in many ways, there are some perverse political incentives that are preventing this from coming to a resolution.
And do we think we get a quick confirmation of Jack Lew to be the ambassador to Israel in the next few weeks?
It won't be quick. They'll get it done eventually. So on Wednesday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is going to vote on his nomination, and then it'll be kicked to the Senate floor. A lot of Republicans have said Jack Lew is not the right guy for this job, and they've said they'll do anything they can to hold it up. If Schumer files cloture, which is a procedural term on the nomination, it will probably take about a week to confirm him, absent an agreement to speed it up.
And in a minute or less, the question you've been asked by friends, family, your Uber drivers, how quickly does the speaker thing get resolved?
Should we start a bet? I feel like we got to start figuring out who could be speaker. No, I really do think we'll see what happens the next 48 hours, but attention will shift if there's not a speaker by Wednesday back to that idea of empowering the acting speaker, Patrick McHenry. That idea was killed last week in conference, but it seems to be the only way that they can figure this out.
Why doesn't he want this job?
It's the least coveted job in Washington.
I suppose that's one way of looking at things. Yes. You know who has good jobs, though? Daniela Diaz and Andrew Desiderio, and they do them well. Thank you both for being here. Come by again.
Thanks, Ed.
Good to see you guys. Former President Donald Trump has filed for the New Hampshire presidential primary ahead. How voters in the Granite State are responding? Keep streaming. America Decides.
Our story's just begun. Why did you want to share your story? Water up this high? Where are these coming from?
That's the million-dollar question.
I'm a very curious person. I wake up every morning asking what's happening in the world, why is this happening, and how do we answer that question on the CBS Evening News?
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
but with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We aim every night to be factual and fair. That's our goal.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Since childhood, she never stopped reaching for the skies. Now she's spent more time in space than any other American.
I like being a part of something bigger than me.
Peggy Whitson's extraordinary career as a history-making astronaut when we go person to person.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I think I asked direct questions. I don't know that they're tough questions per se. Why aren't you holding yourself to that standard? It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. What has to happen? That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. And that means a civil conversation with perspective.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former President Donald Trump has officially filed for the 2024 presidential primary in New Hampshire. He became the first ever former president to file to run again in a New Hampshire primary, showing up as required in person there at the state capitol and paying the $1,000 filing fee. He later held a campaign event in Derry, New Hampshire, where we find CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi covering the Granite State and the former president for us. Olivia, what did Trump discussed during that rally today?
Yeah, hi, Ed. Thanks for having me. As you point out, he was here earlier today in Concord, where he signed for the first in the nation primary to run. However, in his remarks later on in Derry, his focus was not really on the primary, but the general election. He spent the majority of the conversation attacking Joe Biden, especially for his speech last Thursday evening in prime time, where he discussed the war in Israel. Trump said it was neocon warmongering, and he warned that Biden is going to push the U.S. further into conflicts to distract from his poll numbers at home. I thought it was notable that he didn't really spend a lot of time talking about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, talking about former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who are rising in the polls. He really spent the majority of the time focused on Joe Biden, and I expect that in the coming weeks we can see that being his strategy as we get closer to the primaries here.
Yeah, I think as he was telling reporters earlier, he's in the 60s, and the next nearest competitors is something like 8%, so why not focus on the general election? I'm curious, how are New Hampshire voters reacting to his filing today and to his appearance?
Yeah, they're hopeful, you know. I mean, they're excited to see him here. It's just his second visit this month. Earlier in the month, he was in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. And a lot of the people I spoke to here didn't get into that event. So they drove far and wide to come here to see him today. I spoke with some voters earlier about their reaction to the war in Israel. Take a listen here.
I think we're getting too much into the war. I know we have to stand by Israel, but I just think he's a clown.
Want him as a president. He was great at that, and that's it.
I don't even see a future for them. It's with the education and what they're being taught and the way the country is. Yeah, not much hope, unfortunately.
But this gives you hope.
He gives me hope.
As you can tell, these voters, they're excited to have him back in the state. They're excited that he's running. The enthusiasm is extremely palpable. In the room he spoke in earlier today, there's 2,000 people in there. It was almost at capacity, according to the fire chief that I spoke to. So you could just really tell there's a lot of enthusiasm. But on the topic of Israel, there's a little bit of a divide happening in his base. You heard the young woman I spoke with earlier, the first woman I spoke with. She's a young mother, and she told me, I'm worried about us getting dragged into further wars and this being a dangerous situation for my children. I spoke with another voter, though, who said that supporting Israel right now is the most important thing we can do. So a little bit of a divide in that base right there. It'll be interesting to see how Trump plays to both of those factions in the coming weeks.
And quickly, among the people you spoke to, Olivia, do the various investigations and legal cases involving Trump affect his chances or popularity at all?
I think you'll be surprised to hear, Ed, that it didn't really impact how they're feeling about the former president. If anything, his appearances in the courtroom are invigorating them.
Olivia Rinaldi for us in Derry, New Hampshire, covering the former president, as she will continue to do. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ed.
That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so